The transport ship descended through the pale blue atmosphere of Arcturus Prime, carrying its cargo of new recruits toward the Galactic Defense Academy. Inside the passenger bay, dozens of beings from across known space sat in nervous silence. Some were tall and scaled, others short and covered in fur, and a few were completely unlike anything found in nature. Among them sat a human named Jiho, staring out the window at the massive structure below. The academy looked like a small city. White towers stretched toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float without support. Training fields spread out in every direction, marked with obstacles and equipment that Jiho couldn't identify from this height. He'd seen military bases before, plenty of them, but nothing quite like this. The ship landed with barely a whisper. The doors opened, and the recruits filed out onto a landing pad, where instructors were already waiting. Jiho kept his eyes forward, and his mouth shut. Around him, other recruits whispered to each other in various languages, all automatically translated by the small devices behind their ears. He caught fragments of conversation about how prestigious the academy was, how difficult the training would be, how few actually graduated. A voice boomed across the landing pad, cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Form up! 3 lines! Move!" The recruits scrambled to obey. Jiho found his place in the second line, standing at attention with his hands behind his back. The position felt natural to him, comfortable even. But he made sure not to look too perfect. That would draw attention. And attention was the last thing he wanted. The instructor who had shouted was a Valkorian, a species known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with dark green scales covering his body and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His uniform was crisp and decorated with ribbons that marked years of combat service. "I am Sergeant Minho," the Valkorian announced, pacing in front of the assembled recruits. "For the next 6 months, I will be your instructor for tactical operations. Some of you will pass my course, most of you will not. Those who fail will return to your homeworlds with the knowledge that you were not good enough for the Galactic Defense Force." He stopped walking and scanned the lines of recruits with cold eyes. "You come from many worlds, many species. You think your differences make you special. They do not. In my class, you are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise." Jiho had heard similar speeches before. Different words, same message. Break them down, build them back up. It was an old method, but it worked. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Recruits were assigned to barracks, given uniforms, and subjected to physical evaluations. Jiho performed well enough to avoid attention, but not so well that anyone would wonder about his abilities. He ran the obstacle courses in the middle of the pack, scored adequately on written tests, and spoke only when spoken to. His barracks mates were a mixed group. There was Dongyun, another human from a colony world who talked constantly about his family's military history. There was a Thorelian named Cross, who seemed to think everything was a competition. A quiet Zenthari female named Heijin kept to herself in the corner bunk, reading tactical manuals during free time. Others came and went, their faces blurring together as the days passed. During the second week, classes began in earnest. Sergeant Minho's tactical operations course was held in a large auditorium with holographic displays that could simulate any battlefield in the galaxy. The sergeant would present a scenario, and recruits would be called upon to suggest strategies or explain their reasoning. Jiho watched and learned. He saw quickly that Sergeant Minho favored traditional Valkorian tactics, overwhelming force applied at key points, rigid command structures, and little room for improvisation. When recruits suggested alternative approaches, Minho would often dismiss them with barely concealed contempt. During one simulation, a recruit named Salmon suggested using a smaller force to flank an enemy position, while the main group attacked from the front. Sergeant Minho had stared at her for a long moment before replying, "Cute. But in real combat, cute gets people killed. We use proven methods here, not fantasies." The other recruits had laughed nervously. Salmon's face had turned red. but she'd said nothing more. Jiho made mental notes. Minho was competent but inflexible. He respected strength and tradition, but seemed threatened by new ideas. It was a common problem among career military officers who'd spent too long in the same role. They forgot that tactics evolved, that what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. In the third week, they began running combat simulations in virtual reality. Recruits would be placed in scenarios against computer-controlled enemies, their performance recorded and analyzed. Jiho knew this was where things might become complicated. During his first simulation, he deliberately made small mistakes. He took cover a second too late here. Missed an obvious flanking route there. Let his simulated squad take casualties that could have been avoided. When the exercise ended and Sergeant Minho reviewed his performance, the sergeant simply grunted and moved on to the next recruit. Good. He was flying under the radar perfectly. But during his second simulation, something unexpected happened. The computer generated a scenario Jiho had actually lived through 3 years ago during the Frontier Wars. The setting was different. Dawn. The enemy was labeled as something else, but the tactical situation was identical. He'd lost good people that day before figuring out the solution. He couldn't help himself. His body moved on instinct, executing the exact sequence of actions that had saved his unit in the real battle. He flanked through a position that looked impossible, used suppressing fire in a way that seemed wasteful but actually maximized his squad's survival, and completed the objective with 0 casualties. When the simulation ended and he removed his helmet, Sergeant Minho was staring at him with an unreadable expression. The other recruits were looking at him too, some with surprise, others with suspicion. Interesting, Sergeant Minho said slowly. Where did you learn to fight like that, recruit? Jiho kept his face neutral. Basic training, sir, and some tactics I read about in the database. Is that so? Minho's eyes narrowed. What you just did contradicts everything we teach in basic combat doctrine. You exposed your position, wasted ammunition, and took unnecessary risks. By all accounts, you should have failed. Yes, sir, Jiho replied. I'll do better next time. Sergeant Minho stepped closer, studying him the way a scientist might study an interesting specimen. What's your name, recruit? Jiho, sir. From Earth. Earth. Minho said the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. One of the newer members of the Galactic Defense Force. Tell me, Jiho from Earth, how long has your species been traveling the stars? 50 years? 60? Approximately 65 years, sir. 65 years. Minho turned to address the other recruits. The Valkorian people have been exploring space for over 4,000 years. We have fought in wars your ancestors couldn't have imagined. We have refined our tactics through centuries of actual combat, not simulations. He looked back at Jiho. So, when a human recruit with no real experience somehow executes a near-perfect tactical operation, I have to wonder if he simply got lucky, or if he's hiding something. Jiho said nothing. He kept his eyes forward, his expression blank. Sergeant Minho circled him slowly. I'm going to be watching you, recruit, very closely. If you're as good as that simulation suggests, you'll prove it consistently. And if you just got lucky, well, I'll make sure everyone knows it. The sergeant moved on to review the next recruit's performance, but Jiho could feel eyes on him for the rest of the session. He'd made a mistake, a small one, but in an environment like this, small mistakes could grow into big problems. As the class ended and recruits filed out of the auditorium, Heijin, the quiet Zenthari female, fell into step beside him. That was impressive, she said softly. Where did you really learn to fight like that? Jiho glanced at her. I told the truth. Basic training and reading. She smiled slightly. If you say so. But be careful. Sergeant Minho doesn't like being shown up. Even accidentally. Trust. TB. She walked away before Jiho could respond. leaving him with the uncomfortable knowledge that his cover was already beginning to crack. 3 weeks had passed since Jiho's impressive simulation performance, and Sergeant Minho had been true to his word. He watched Jiho constantly, calling on him more than other recruits, scrutinizing every decision, every movement, every word. Jiho had gone back to making deliberate mistakes, but he could tell the sergeant wasn't convinced. The morning started like any other. Recruits assembled in the main auditorium for what was supposed to be a routine tactical briefing. But when Jiho entered the massive room, he noticed something different. There were too many people. Not just his class, but 3 other classes as well, along with multiple instructors he'd never seen before. Nearly 200 beings filled the tiered seating, their conversations creating a low rumble that echoed off the curved walls. Jiho found a seat near the back and tried to make himself invisible. Whatever this was about, he wanted no part of it. Sergeant Minho stood at the front of the auditorium beside a large holographic display. When the room had filled, he activated his voice amplifier, and the conversations died away. Today's briefing will focus on a practical analysis of recent simulation exercises, Minho announced. We will examine both successful and unsuccessful tactical decisions, so you can learn from real examples. He pulled up data on the display, showing recordings from various training scenarios. For the next 20 minutes, he walked through different situations, sometimes praising a recruit's quick thinking, other times pointing out fatal errors. The recruits whose performances were shown either beamed with pride or sank low in their seats depending on the commentary. Then Sergeant Minho pulled up a recording that made Jiho's stomach tighten. It was his simulation from 3 weeks ago, the one where he'd performed too well. This next example is particularly interesting, Minho said, his voice taking on an edge that put Jiho on alert. Recruit Jiho, please come to the front. Every head in the auditorium turned to look at him. Jiho stood slowly and made his way down the steps to the presentation area, aware of hundreds of eyes following his movement. When he reached the front, he stood at attention facing Sergeant Minho. Let's review your performance in this exercise, Minho said, playing the recording. The holographic display showed Jiho's simulated avatar moving through the battlefield, executing the tactics that had drawn the sergeant's attention weeks ago. Can you explain your reasoning here? Minho pointed to a moment where Jiho had exposed his position to draw enemy fire. Standard doctrine says you should have remained in cover. Why didn't you? I assessed that drawing their attention would allow my squad to advance, sir. Jiho replied calmly. You assessed. Minho's tone made the words sound like an insult. Based on your extensive military experience? I suppose? A few recruits in the audience laughed. Jiho kept his face neutral. Based on the tactical situation, sir. I see. And here. Minho fast-forwarded to another section. You used 3 times the ammunition necessary for suppressing fire. That's wasteful. Resources are limited in real combat. Did your basic training not cover resource management? It did, sir. I judged that the tactical advantage was worth the resource expenditure. You judged? Minho turned to face the audience. This is what happens when recruits think they know better than established doctrine. They make individual judgments based on limited experience and get their squads killed. He turned back to Jiho. The fact that you succeeded in the simulation doesn't mean your approach was correct. The computer doesn't account for the chaos of real combat. The fear, the confusion, the fact that your squad members might not execute your risky plan perfectly. Yes, sir, Jiho said, because there was nothing else to say. But Sergeant Minho wasn't finished. He advanced the recording again, his criticism growing sharper with each decision he questioned. The tone shifted from instructional to personal. Other instructors in the room began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances but saying nothing. Protocol dictated they not interfere with another sergeant's teaching methods. You come from Earth, correct? Minho asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. Yes, sir. Earth. A planet that only joined the Galactic Defense Force 65 years ago. A species with virtually no combat experience compared to the older members of the GDF. Minho's voice carried clearly through the amplification system, ensuring every recruit heard every word. Tell me, recruit, how many major conflicts has humanity participated in since joining the GDF? Several, sir, including the Frontier Wars and minor skirmishes, Minho interrupted. Border disputes. Nothing compared to the centuries of warfare that species like the Valkorians, the Zenthari, or the Thorellians have experienced. Yet here you stand, thinking you can ignore the tactical wisdom developed over thousands of years of real combat. Jiho felt anger beginning to coil in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting emotional would accomplish nothing. I apologize if my performance in the simulation was inappropriate, sir, he said evenly. Inappropriate? Minho's laugh was harsh. Your performance was lucky. That's all. You took absurd risks, and the computer happened to reward them. In real combat, you'd be dead. And everyone following your orders would be dead with you. The sergeant walked around Jiho slowly, like a predator circling prey. This is why the academy standards are so high. We can't afford to graduate officers who think combat is about showing off or trying unconventional tactics just to be different. We need leaders who understand discipline, who follow proven methods, who don't let ego override common sense. He stopped directly in front of Jiho. Do you understand what I'm saying, recruit? Yes, sir. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, I see a human recruit who thinks 65 years of spaceflight makes his species equal to races that have been fighting wars since before your ancestors learned to make fire. I see someone who's watched too many adventure holos and thinks real combat is about being clever instead of being competent. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Jiho could hear his own breathing, feel his pulse in his temples. He wanted to respond, to defend himself and his species, but he couldn't. Not without revealing information he wasn't authorized to share. Perhaps, Sergeant Minho continued, addressing the audience now. We've been too lenient with newer species. Perhaps we've been so eager to appear inclusive that we've lowered our standards. After all, we can't expect humans to perform at the same level as species with thousands of years of military tradition. Several alien recruits nodded in agreement. A few human recruits in the crowd looked down at their hands, faces burning with shame. Donghyun, Jiho's barracks mate, looked like he wanted to sink through his chair and disappear. Tell me, recruit, Minho said, turning back to Jiho. Why should you remain in this academy? Why should we waste resources training someone who clearly isn't ready for this level of instruction? Give me one good reason. Before Jiho could answer, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened with a soft hiss. The sound was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a thunderclap. Sergeant Minho's head snapped toward the sound, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. As she walked forward into the light, Jiho recognized her species immediately. Zenthari, one of the most respected races in the galaxy, for their tactical brilliance and strict sense of honor. She wore the uniform of a GDF commander, her chest decorated with more commendations than Jiho could count at a glance. The effect on the room was instantaneous. Every recruit and instructor shot to their feet, standing at rigid attention. Sergeant Minho's eyes went wide, and for the first time since Jiho had met him, the Valkorian looked genuinely surprised. The commander walked down the center aisle with unhurried confidence. Her boots made soft sounds on the floor, the only noise in the completely silent auditorium. She was tall for a Zenthari, with the characteristic silver-blue skin of her people, and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they touched. Her uniform was immaculate, and she moved with the easy grace of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. As she approached the front, Jiho noticed the name on her uniform. Commander Taeyun. He felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Everyone in the Special Operations community knew that name. Commander Taeyun reached the presentation area and stopped a few feet from where Jiho stood. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she turned her gaze to Sergeant Minho. Sergeant, she said, her voice quiet but carrying easily through the amplification system. "Am I interrupting something important?" "Commander Taeyeon," Minho stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "We were conducting a routine tactical review. I was providing feedback to recruit." "I heard," Taeyeon interrupted smoothly. "Your voice carries quite well. I could hear your lesson from halfway across the compound." Minho's scales darkened slightly, the Valkorian equivalent of a blush. "Yes, Commander. I was explaining the importance of following established tactical doctrine. Were you?" It wasn't a question. Taeyeon looked back at Jiho, and something shifted in her expression. The severity softened, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. When she spoke again, the single word she used changed everything. "Captain." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Captain. Not recruit. Not cadet. Captain. Confusion rippled through the auditorium. Recruits turned to each other with questioning looks. Even the instructors seemed caught off guard. Exchanging uncertain glances, Sergeant Minho's mouth opened and closed without sound, his scales going from dark embarrassment to pale shock. Commander Taeyeon continued, as if she hadn't just dropped an explosive revelation into the room. "Captain Park Jiho, I apologize for interrupting your training, but we have a developing situation in the Outer Rim that requires your expertise. I need you for an urgent briefing." Jiho remained at attention, his face carefully neutral. "At ease, Captain." Taeyeon's expression remained professional, but there was warmth in her eyes. "How has the cross-training program been treating you so far?" "Educational, ma'am. I've learned a great deal about GDF standard operating procedures. I'm glad to hear it." She glanced at Sergeant Minho, who stood frozen like a statue. "Sergeant, I trust there's no issue with me borrowing Captain Park for a few hours? Unless your tactical review is too critical to interrupt?" Minho finally found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. "We were just reviewing." He trailed off, seeming unable to complete the thought. "Excellent." Taeyeon turned back to Jiho. "Captain, if you'll come with me, we can discuss the situation in my office." "Yes, ma'am." Jiho moved to follow her. But Taeyeon paused, seeming to remember something. "Oh, Sergeant Minho," she said casually, "before I forget, Captain Park is one of my top special operations officers. He's here as part of an exchange program, cross-training in standard GDF procedures, while also consulting with our Tactical Development Division. I specifically requested him for this program based on his exemplary service record." The color had completely drained from Minho's scales. He looked like he might be sick. Commander Taeyeon continued, her tone remaining conversational. "I understand the Academy encourages realistic training environments, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of Captain Park's actual status. Wouldn't want any unfortunate misunderstandings to occur." "No, Commander." "Of course not, Commander." "Good." Taeyeon smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Captain Park's performance reviews are sent directly to me. By the way, I've been reading them with great interest. Very thorough documentation." She let that statement settle for a moment before turning to walk toward the exit. Jiho fell into step beside her, aware of the hundreds of eyes following their movement. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. He could have heard a pin drop. As they reached the doors, Taeyeon paused one final time and addressed the room at large. "For those of you who may not be familiar with Earth's military contributions to the Galactic Defense Force, I encourage you to research the frontier wars, particularly the Battle of Kepler Station and the Siege of New Harmony. Captain Park played significant roles in both engagements." With that, she exited the auditorium with Jiho following behind her. The doors closed, leaving chaos in their wake. They walked in silence down the corridor outside. Jiho kept pace with Commander Taeyeon, matching her stride naturally. After they'd put some distance between themselves and the auditorium, he finally spoke. "That was dramatic, ma'am." "Was it?" Taeyeon's lips quirked. "I thought I showed remarkable restraint. I could have mentioned the 3 galactic merit stars, or the Void Cross." or the fact that you've completed more successful operations than Sergeant Minho has overseen in his entire career. The point was made, ma'am. Good. Her expression sobered. I actually do need to speak with you, Jiho. But it's not urgent. And it's not about the outer rim. I needed an excuse to extract you from what was becoming a very inappropriate situation. I had it under control. I'm sure you did, but you shouldn't have had to. Taeyeon stopped walking and turned to face him. What happened in there was beyond normal instructor discipline. That was public humiliation motivated by species prejudice. It's unacceptable at this academy or anywhere in the GDF. Jiho shifted his weight. With respect, ma'am, I requested to experience the academy as a regular recruit. That includes dealing with instructors like Sergeant Minho. There's a difference between demanding excellence and what I heard from the hallway. He questioned your competence, your species' capabilities, and the value of your presence here. Those aren't the actions of a good instructor. They're the actions of someone feeling threatened. Threatened by me? By what you represent. Taeyeon resumed walking, but slower now. You have to understand, Jiho, many of the older species in the GDF have a certain perspective on humanity. You're new, young. You don't have thousands of years of spaceflight history or established military traditions. To some, that makes you lesser, unproven. We've proven ourselves plenty in actual combat. You have. I've seen it firsthand. But there's a difference between intellectual knowledge and emotional acceptance. Sergeant Minho knows humanity has fought well in recent conflicts, but accepting that humans might actually be equals, or even superiors in some areas, challenges his worldview. It threatens his sense of identity as a member of a superior military culture. They turned a corner into a quieter section of the academy. Through the windows, Jiho could see training fields, where recruits ran obstacle courses under the watch of distant instructors. The simulation you ran, Taeyeon said. The one Minho was criticizing. That was from the Kepler station operation. Wasn't it? Jiho nodded. Modified. But essentially the same tactical problem. I didn't realize it until I was already in the scenario, and you solved it the same way you did in real life. Muscle memory. Training. I moved without thinking, which revealed your experience level to anyone paying attention. Taeyeon smiled slightly. You know, when you first proposed this cross-training idea, I thought it was brilliant. Experience the academy from a recruit's perspective. See how standard GDF training differs from special operations. Build empathy with the younger generation of officers. In theory, it was perfect. But in practice, I didn't account for instructors like Minho, who can't handle having their methods questioned, even inadvertently. She sighed. I should have prepared better, should have briefed the staff more thoroughly. It's not your responsibility, ma'am. I chose this. I knew there were risks. They reached an elevator that would take them to the upper levels where the senior staff offices were located. Taeyeon pressed the call button and waited. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. Do you know why I specifically requested you for this program, Jiho? You said it was because of my service record. That's part of it. But the main reason is because you represent something important. You're proof that humanity's military value isn't about matching the older species in their own image. It's about bringing something new to the table. Your tactics work, not because they follow Valkorian doctrine or Zenthuri strategic theory, but because they come from a different perspective entirely. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside. Taeyeon selected a floor and the doors closed. Earth's military history is unique, she continued. You had thousands of years of warfare before ever leaving your planet. Different nations, different cultures, different approaches to combat, all evolving simultaneously. When humanity joined the GDF, you brought all that accumulated knowledge with you. Tactics that developed from jungle warfare, desert combat, urban operations, naval battles, aerial dogfights, experiences that other species simply don't have because they unified their military doctrine millennia ago. Jiho had never thought about it quite that way. So, our lack of spacefaring history is actually an advantage? In some ways, yes. You're not bound by tradition because you don't have thousands of years of tradition. You can adapt quickly, try new approaches, combine methods that others would never consider mixing. It makes humanity unpredictable, which in combat is a tremendous asset. The elevator opened onto a floor with thick carpeting and walls lined with commendations and historical displays. They walked past offices where senior officers worked behind closed doors. "What happens now?" Jiho asked. "To Sergeant Minho." "I mean, that depends on several factors. What he did was serious, but not necessarily career-ending. He'll be reprimanded, certainly, required to undergo additional training on species sensitivity and proper instructor conduct. Whether he remains at the academy is up to the commandant. I don't want to end his career." Taeyeon glanced at him. "That's very gracious of you. But this isn't just about what you want. Minho's behavior reflects on the academy and the GDF as a whole. We can't have instructors who treat recruits differently based on species origin. It undermines everything we're trying to build." They reached Taeyeon's office, a spacious room with windows overlooking the training grounds. She gestured for Jiho to take a seat while she moved behind her desk. "I meant what I said about needing to speak with you," she said, pulling up a holographic display. "Not about the Outer Rim, but about your next assignment after the academy program ends. I assumed I'd return to my unit. That's one option. But I have another proposal." She manipulated the display, showing him mission briefings and personnel files. "I'm assembling a new joint operations team. Mixed species, mixed specialties, designed to handle situations that require flexible thinking and unconventional approaches. I want you to lead it." Jiho studied the information floating in front of him. The mission parameters were deliberately vague, but he could read between the lines. This would be black operations, the kind of work that happened in the shadows, where official policy ended. "Why me?" "Because you think differently. Because you can work with anyone. Because you've proven you can earn respect without demanding it." Taeyeon leaned forward. "And because, after today, half the academy is going to be researching your service record and questioning their assumptions about human capabilities. You'll be famous, whether you want to be or not. Might as well put that fame to good use." Before Jiho could respond, there was a knock at the door. Taeyeon called for entry, and an aide stepped in. "Commander, the Academy Commandant is requesting an emergency meeting with you and all senior instructors. It's regarding the incident in the main auditorium." Taeyeon nodded. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes." The aide left, and she turned back to Jiho. "You should probably make yourself scarce for a few hours. This conversation is going to get complicated." Jiho stood. "What should I tell the other recruits? When I go back to the barracks?" "Tell them the truth. You're a special operations officer completing cross-training. You're still their fellow cadet for the duration of the program, and you expect to be treated accordingly." She smiled. "Though I doubt they'll see you quite the same way after this." "No," Jiho agreed. "Probably not." The emergency meeting took place in the Academy Commandant's conference room, a secure space designed for sensitive discussions. Commandant Ren, a distinguished Thurelian with silver fur and eyes that had seen decades of service, sat at the head of a long table. Around him were gathered every senior instructor at the academy, along with Commander Taeyeon and several administrative officials. Sergeant Minho sat near the end of the table, looking smaller somehow despite his imposing physical presence. His scales had taken on a grayish tinge, a sign of deep stress among Valkorians. "Let's begin," Commandant Ren said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Commander Taeyeon, thank you for joining us on short notice. I believe you have context that the rest of us are lacking." Taeyeon stood, activating a holographic display that appeared above the table. With a few gestures, she brought up a personnel file. The image showed Jiho in full military dress uniform. his chest displaying an array of commendations that made several instructors lean forward in surprise. This is Captain Park Ji-ho, currently assigned to the 7th Special Operations Division of the Galactic Defense Force. Age 32. 12 years of active service. Veteran of the Frontier Wars. Taeyeon's voice was calm and professional as she scrolled through the information. 3 Galactic Merit Stars for actions above and beyond the call of duty. 1 Void Cross for extraordinary valor in combat. 17. Successful deep operations. Missions. 0 mission failures. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic display. Instructors who had been present in the auditorium looked uncomfortable. Those who hadn't been there looked confused. Captain Park volunteered for the Academy Exchange Program 6 months ago, Taeyeon continued. The purpose was threefold. First, to allow him to experience standard GDF training methods from a recruit's perspective, which would inform his work training future special operations candidates. Second, to provide the Academy with a resource, someone who could offer insights into human military tactics for potential integration into GDF doctrine. Third, to promote cross-species understanding by demonstrating that even experienced officers can benefit from continued learning. She paused, letting that sink in. The program was approved at the highest levels. Only Commandant Ren and his immediate staff were informed of Captain Park's true identity and background. This was at Captain Park's specific request. He wanted an authentic experience, not special treatment. Commandant Ren spoke up. I agreed to these terms because I believed it would benefit both Captain Park and our institution. In retrospect, perhaps we should have briefed the instructor staff more thoroughly. With respect, sir, Taeyeon said, I don't believe that would have prevented what happened today. If instructors had known Captain Park's background, he wouldn't have received the authentic training experience he was seeking. The issue isn't that Sergeant Minho didn't know who he was dealing with. The issue is how Sergeant Minho chose to conduct himself regardless. All eyes turned to Minho, who looked like he wished he could disappear. Taeyeon pulled up another file. Let me provide some specific context about Captain Park's service record, since it's relevant to what occurred today. She displayed a tactical map, showing a space station, surrounded by hostile forces. The Battle of Kepler Station. 4 years ago, a critical supply hub was besieged by raiders with superior numbers and firepower. Standard GDF forces were 3 days away. Captain Park was leading a training exercise nearby with a unit that included only 37 personnel from mixed species backgrounds. The tactical map began to animate, showing the movement of forces. Against orders, Captain Park made the decision to intervene, despite being vastly outnumbered, using unconventional tactics that violated established GDF combat doctrine. He led his small force in a series of hit-and-run attacks that disrupted the raiders' assault. He held the station for 2.5 days until reinforcements arrived, saving over 12,000 civilian lives. She let that number hang in the air. 12,000 lives. The tactics he used were considered reckless by his superior officers. He exposed his forces to enemy fire to create diversions. He used 3 times the normal ammunition expenditure to maintain suppressive fire that kept the raiders off balance. He sent small teams through positions that tactical computers deemed impossible to traverse. Minho's head dropped. He understood now. The simulation he had criticized so harshly wasn't theoretical or lucky. It was a recreation of an actual battle where Ji-ho's supposedly wasteful, reckless, doctrine-violating tactics had saved thousands of lives. Taeyeon continued. Captain Park was initially court-martialed for disobeying orders. The charges were dropped after a formal review board examined his decisions and concluded that following standard doctrine would have resulted in the station's destruction and massive loss of life. He received his first Galactic Merit Star for that action. She pulled up another tactical display. The Siege of New Harmony. 3 years ago. A colony world, under attack by well-organized mercenary forces. Captain Park led a joint operations team that included, and this is important, personnel from 6 different species, including human, Valkorian, Xanthari, Thorelian, and 2 others. The display showed a complex operation with multiple elements moving simultaneously. The defensive strategy combined human guerrilla tactics with Valkorian assault doctrine, Xanthari strategic planning, and Thorelian reconnaissance methods. It was unprecedented. Military analysts said it shouldn't have worked because the tactical philosophies were too different to integrate effectively. But it did work, Commandant Wren said quietly. It worked brilliantly. The mercenary forces were routed in 72 hours with minimal defender casualties. Captain Park's ability to synthesize different tactical approaches into a coherent strategy earned him his 2nd merit star, and the respect of every species representative on his team. Taeyeon closed the tactical displays and pulled up a document. This is a letter of commendation written by General Vakris, the Valkorian Supreme Commander of GDF forces in the Outer Rim. I'll read a portion of it. She cleared her throat and began. Captain Park represents the best of what the Galactic Defense Force can achieve. His tactics are unconventional, sometimes appearing to contradict established wisdom, but his results speak for themselves. He has taught me that military excellence is not about following doctrine blindly, but about understanding the principles behind the doctrine and knowing when to adapt them. Humanity brings fresh perspective to our force, and we are stronger for it. The silence that followed was profound. Several instructors shifted uncomfortably. One Valkorian officer, who had been nodding along with Sergeant Minho's criticism earlier, now studied his hands with intense interest. Taeyeon returned to her seat. Captain Park is not just a competent officer. He's one of the most decorated and respected special operations commanders in the GDF. He's fought alongside Valkorians, commanded mixed species units, and earned the trust of military leadership across the galaxy. And today, in front of 200 recruits and instructors, he was publicly humiliated and told that his species is inferior, and his presence at this academy is a waste of resources. Sergeant Minho finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. No, you didn't. Taeyeon agreed. But that's not really the point, is it? You didn't know his background, but you made assumptions based on his species. You criticized tactics that have been proven effective in actual combat. You used your position of authority to embarrass someone in front of his peers, not because of poor performance, but because his approach didn't match your expectations. Commander, Commandant Wren interjected gently, I think Sergeant Minho understands the severity of his error. The question now is how we proceed from here. With respect, sir, I have concerns beyond just this single incident. Taeyeon looked around the table. How many other instructors hold similar views about humanity or other newer species? How many recruits have been unfairly evaluated because they don't fit the traditional mold? This isn't just about one sergeant having a bad day. This is about institutional culture. An older Xanthari instructor named Instructor Daehyun spoke up. Commander Taeyeon, I don't think it's fair to paint all of us with the same brush. Many of us have worked very hard to create an inclusive environment. I'm not suggesting otherwise, Taeyeon replied. But we need to be honest about the challenges. The GDF has expanded rapidly in recent decades. We've added multiple new species, each bringing their own military traditions and tactical philosophies. That's a strength, but only if we actually embrace those differences rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. Commandant Wren nodded slowly. You're right. This incident has exposed a problem we need to address systematically. He turned to Minho. Sergeant, you will be formally reprimanded for your conduct today. You'll also be required to complete additional training on species sensitivity and appropriate instructor behavior. Yes, sir, Minho said quietly. However, the Commandant continued, I'm not going to remove you from your position. Not yet. Commander Taeyeon, you mentioned that Captain Park didn't want to end Sergeant Minho's career. Is that correct? It is. Then I propose an alternative. Sergeant Minho, You will work directly with Captain Park for the remainder of his time at the Academy. You'll collaborate on developing new training protocols that integrate human tactical approaches with traditional GDF methods. Consider it an opportunity to learn from your mistakes and contribute something positive to the Academy. Minho looked up, surprise evident in his expression. Sir, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Minho looked up. I want to FC7. Reens, one side. I want see. Don't thank me yet. If you can't put aside your prejudices and work constructively with Captain Park, you're done here. Understood? Understood, sir. Commandant Wren turned to address the entire group. This incident is going to generate talk. The recruits who witnessed what happened will share the story. By tomorrow, everyone at the Academy will know that we had a highly decorated officer training incognito. We need to get ahead of this narrative. We hall bon one. Ask-o. He pulled up a schedule on his display. I'm calling a full Academy assembly for tomorrow morning. I'll address what happened. Introduce Captain Park properly, and make it clear that the GDF values diverse tactical approaches and perspectives. I'll also announce the new initiative to integrate more varied tactical training into our curriculum. That's wise, Taeyeon said, and it sends the right message to both the recruits and the instructor staff. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing the specifics of how to implement changes and support the new direction. Throughout it all, Sergeant Minho sat quietly, the weight of his mistake clearly bearing down on him. When the meeting finally adjourned, Minho approached Commander Taeyeon as others filed out. Commander, he said hesitantly, is Captain Park? Is he angry? Taeyeon considered the question. Jiho doesn't get angry easily. He's disappointed. Perhaps. Tired of having to prove humanity's worth. Over and over again. But angry? No. He understands that changing deeply held beliefs takes time. I need to apologize to him, properly. You will. Tomorrow, after the assembly, you'll begin working together. But Sergeant, a word of advice. She fixed him with a steady gaze. Don't just apologize with words. Apologize with actions. Show him and everyone else that you're capable of growth. That's how you'll truly make amends. Minho nodded slowly. I will. I promise. As he left, Taeyeon remained in the conference room with Commandant Wren. Do you think he can change? The Commandant asked. I don't know, Taeyeon admitted. But I believe everyone deserves the chance to try. And if he can change, if he can become a better instructor because of this, then something good will have come from a bad situation. And if he can't, then we'll deal with that when the time comes. She smiled slightly. But I have faith in Jiho. If anyone can reach Minho and help him understand, it's him. That's why he's so good at leading mixed species teams. He doesn't just tolerate differences. He finds ways to turn them into strengths. Humanity's secret weapon? One of them, Taeyeon agreed. One of many. The next morning, every recruit and instructor at the Galactic Defense Academy assembled in the main parade ground. It was a rare occurrence. A full gathering that only happened for major announcements or ceremonies. The sky above Arcturus Prime was clear and bright, making the neat rows of uniforms stand out in sharp contrast against the white stone of the surrounding buildings. Jiho stood in formation with his class, aware of the whispers and glances directed his way. The story had spread overnight, as Commandant Wren had predicted. Everyone knew now that the quiet human recruit was actually a decorated special operations captain. Some looked at him with newfound respect. Others seemed uncomfortable, perhaps wondering what else they'd said or done in his presence that they now regretted. Dongyun, his barracks mate, had been speechless when Jiho returned the previous evening. After several false starts, he'd finally managed to ask, "Why didn't you tell us? Would you have treated me the same if you'd known?" Jiho had replied. That question had ended the conversation. Now, standing in the morning sun, Ji-ho watched as Commandant Ren took the podium at the front of the assembly. The Commandant's voice, amplified across the grounds, carried clearly to every listener. "Recruits and staff of the Galactic Defense Academy," Ren began. "Yesterday, an incident occurred that requires us to address some fundamental principles of our institution. You've likely heard various versions of what happened. Allow me to provide you with the facts." He proceeded to explain the exchange program, Ji-ho's background, and the purpose of his presence at the academy. The recruits listened with rapt attention as the commandant detailed Ji-ho's service record, including the battles that had earned him his commendations. "Captain Park is here to learn from us," Ren continued, "but also to teach us. The Galactic Defense Force is stronger when we embrace the tactical knowledge and unique perspectives that each species brings to our organization. We cannot afford to dismiss innovation simply because it doesn't conform to tradition." The commandant paused, scanning the assembled crowd. "Yesterday, one of our instructors allowed personal bias to cloud professional judgment. That cannot happen again. Every recruit here, regardless of species or background, deserves to be evaluated fairly based on their actual performance and potential." Ji-ho saw Sergeant Minho standing with the other instructors, his posture rigid and formal. The Valkorian's expression was unreadable from this distance. "Moving forward," Commandant Ren announced, "we will be implementing new training protocols that incorporate tactical approaches from all member species of the GDF. Captain Park has agreed to extend his time with us to help develop these protocols. He will be working directly with our instructor staff to ensure future generations of officers are exposed to the full spectrum of military thinking available to us." The announcement generated a buzz of conversation among the recruits, before falling silent again at the commandant's gesture. "Let me be clear," Ren said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The Galactic Defense Force does not tolerate prejudice based on species origin. We do not dismiss ideas simply because they're unfamiliar. We do not lower ourselves by treating our fellow service members as inferior. Anyone who cannot embrace these principles does not belong here." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment before softening his tone. "We are all here to learn, to grow, to become better officers and better defenders of the peace we've built across the stars. That process requires humility and openness. It requires us to admit when we're wrong, and to seek wisdom from unexpected sources." The commandant concluded his speech and dismissed the assembly. As recruits began to disperse, Ji-ho felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Hei-jin, the quiet Zenthari female from his barracks. "That first week," she said, "when I told you to be careful around Sergeant Minho, I knew something was different about you. The way you moved, the way you thought. I couldn't place it, but I knew." "You have good instincts," Ji-ho replied. "We all do, if we pay attention." She smiled. "I'm glad the truth came out. What happened yesterday was wrong. Maybe now, things will change." Over the following days, change did come, though not always smoothly. Ji-ho was summoned to the commandant's office, where he found Sergeant Minho waiting for him. The Valkorian stood at attention, clearly uncomfortable. "Captain Park," Minho began formally, "I owe you an apology. My conduct toward you was unprofessional and inappropriate. I allowed my own biases to affect my judgment, and I humiliated you in front of your peers. There is no excuse for my behavior." Ji-ho studied the sergeant for a long moment. The apology seemed genuine, though he could see the strain it took for Minho to deliver it. "Apology accepted, Sergeant," Ji-ho said. "On one condition." "Anything, sir. Don't call me sir during the training program. I'm still technically a recruit here. More importantly, we're going to be working together. That requires mutual respect, not just deference to rank." Minho blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Completely. If we're going to develop effective training protocols, we need to be able to challenge each other's ideas freely. That's harder to do if you're constantly thinking of me as a superior officer rather than a colleague." A small smile appeared on Minho's face, the first Ji-ho had seen from him. "That's very human of you, is it? Good. Maybe you'll learn something. They began meeting daily to work on the new training curriculum. At first, the sessions were awkward and formal. Minho was clearly still processing his mistake and unsure how to interact with Jiho outside the traditional instructor-recruit dynamic. But gradually, as they discussed tactics and training methods, the tension eased. Jiho shared stories from his combat experience, explaining the reasoning behind tactics that seemed reckless by conventional standards. Minho, in turn, explained the historical context of Valkorian military doctrine and why certain approaches had been standardized over thousands of years. The problem, Jiho observed during one session, is that doctrine becomes dogma. What worked in one context gets applied universally, even when circumstances are completely different. But without standardized procedures, Minho countered, you get chaos. Every officer doing their own thing. No coordination. No predictability. True. So the answer is somewhere in between. Strong foundational principles that everyone understands, but flexibility in application, based on specific situations. Minho considered this like a martial art. The basic techniques are always the same, but how you combine them depends on your opponent. Exactly. Jiho was pleased the sergeant was beginning to grasp the concept. They continued working through scenarios, identifying places where different tactical approaches could be integrated. Minho proved to be a quick learner once he set aside his preconceptions. He began asking questions about human military history, genuinely curious about how Earth's diverse combat experiences had shaped their approach to warfare. Your species fought wars against itself for thousands of years, Minho said during one discussion. That seems wasteful. Tragic. It was, Jiho agreed. But it also meant we developed an incredible variety of tactical approaches. Every culture, every nation had their own methods. Some emphasized mobility, others, defense. Some focused on technology, others on individual skill. When humanity unified, we brought all that knowledge together. And that's why your tactics seem unpredictable to us. You're drawing from a much wider pool of historical experience. Right. While the Valkorians spent 4,000 years perfecting a single unified approach, humans spent 4,000 years trying hundreds of different approaches. Both have value. As weeks passed, their collaboration produced tangible results. They designed simulation scenarios that required recruits to adapt between different tactical philosophies. They created exercises where mixed-species teams had to integrate their various combat methods. They developed assessment criteria that valued creative problem-solving alongside technical proficiency. Other instructors began joining their sessions, contributing ideas from their own species' military traditions. What had started as a remedial assignment for Sergeant Minho evolved into a genuine academy-wide initiative to modernize training. Jiho noticed changes beyond just the curriculum development. Recruits from newer species seemed more confident, more willing to contribute their ideas in class. Human recruits no longer hunched their shoulders when their tactical suggestions differed from established doctrine. Even the instructors seemed more open to questioning their own assumptions. One evening, as Jiho was reviewing training data in his quarters, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Sergeant Minho standing there, looking uncertain. Do you have a moment? Minho asked. Of course. Come in. Minho entered and stood awkwardly in the small room. I wanted to. I've been thinking about what happened, about my behavior, and I realized that my apology wasn't complete. You apologized. We moved forward. No, I apologized for humiliating you. But I didn't apologize for the beliefs that led to that behavior. I genuinely thought humans were inferior, less capable. I thought 65 years of spaceflight couldn't compare to 4,000 years of Valkorian military tradition. Jiho waited for him to continue. Working with you these past weeks has shown me how wrong I was. Not just intellectually, but fundamentally. You've challenged every assumption I had about what makes a good officer, what constitutes effective tactics, what it means to lead. Minho's voice grew quieter. I was so certain I knew the right way to do things. That certainty made me arrogant, closed-minded, a worse instructor than I should have been. We all have blind spots, Jiho said gently. The important thing is recognizing them and being willing to change. That's what I'm trying to do, but it's harder than I expected. I find myself falling back into old patterns of thinking, dismissing ideas that don't fit my worldview. That's normal. Real change takes time. Minho looked at him directly. How do you do it? How do you remain so open to different approaches? So willing to learn from anyone? Jiho thought about the question. Human military history taught us that there's no one right way to fight. We've seen brilliant tactics fail, and desperate gambits succeed. We've watched carefully planned operations fall apart, and improvised responses save the day. That uncertainty, that chaos, is actually an advantage. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that we don't have all the answers. The Valkorians pride themselves on having answers, on knowing the proper way to do things, and that pride is both your strength and your weakness. It gives you confidence and cohesion, but it also makes you rigid. How do I fix that? You're already doing it. By asking questions. By admitting you don't know everything. By being willing to learn from a species you once considered inferior. Jiho smiled. Besides, you're teaching me too. I've learned a lot about Valkorian tactical theory these past weeks. Understanding why you do things the way you do has made me a better officer. Minho seemed surprised by that. Really? Really? There's wisdom in your traditions. Structure and discipline have value. I'm incorporating some Valkorian principles into my own approach. That's what collaboration means. We all grow. The sergeant looked relieved. Thank you. For your patience. For giving me a chance to be better. Thank Commander Taeyun and Commandant Ren. They're the ones who set up this arrangement. No. Minho said firmly. Thank you. You could have demanded my dismissal. You had every right to, after what I did. Instead, you chose to work with me. To teach me. That's not something I'll forget. After Minho left, Jiho sat alone with his thoughts. The incident in the auditorium felt like it had happened months ago, rather than weeks. So much had changed since then, not just for Minho, but for the entire academy. The final weeks of the program passed quickly. Jiho completed his cross-training certification, now openly acknowledged as Captain Park, rather than Recruit Jiho. The new integrated training protocols were officially adopted into the academy curriculum. Several of the simulation scenarios he'd helped design became permanent fixtures of the tactical operations course. On his last day, the academy held a small ceremony. Commandant Ren presented Jiho with a commendation for his contributions to GDF training development. Sergeant Minho, standing with the other instructors, applauded along with everyone else. After the ceremony, as Jiho was preparing to depart, a group of recruits approached him. Among them was Unji, a young human woman who'd arrived in the most recent class of cadets. Captain Park, she said nervously, could we ask you something? Of course. We heard about what happened with Sergeant Minho, and we wanted to know. Does it get easier? Being human in the GDF? Feeling like we have to prove ourselves constantly? Crew. Jiho looked at the group of young faces, seeing his own uncertainties reflected in their eyes. Honestly? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There will always be people who doubt you because of where you come from. But there will also be people who judge you by your actions, your character, your results. Focus on being the best officer you can be. The respect will follow. What if it doesn't? Another recruit asked. Then you keep being the best officer you can be anyway, not for their respect, but for yourself, for your crew, for the mission. That's what professionalism means. Unji nodded slowly. As Jiho finally departed the academy, heading back to his ship and his next assignment, he thought about how much had happened during his time there. He'd come seeking to understand standard GDF training methods and had ended up sparking a broader conversation about diversity and tactical innovation. Commander Taeyun was waiting at the transport pad. "Ready to return to the real work?" "More than ready," Jiho replied. "Though I have to admit, teaching has its rewards. You made a difference here, not just in the curriculum, but in changing how people think." She smiled. "The Academy won't forget Captain Park anytime soon." "Good. Maybe the next human recruit who comes through won't have to deal with the same assumptions I did." "Maybe. Though knowing humanity, they'll find new ways to surprise us." Taeyun's expression grew more serious. "I wasn't joking about that joint operations team I mentioned. The position is still open if you're interested." "I am. Send me the details." As the transport lifted off, Jiho looked down at the academy one final time. In one of the training yards, he could see Sergeant Minho instructing a class. The Valkorian's teaching style looked different now, less rigid, more engaging. Students were asking questions and offering suggestions, rather than simply absorbing information. Change was possible. People could grow. Organizations could evolve. It just took patience, humility, and the courage to admit when you were wrong. Humanity had brought many things to the Galactic Defense Force. New tactics, fresh perspectives, unconventional approaches to old problems. But perhaps the most valuable contribution was simply the reminder that strength came not from dominance or superiority, but from the willingness to learn from anyone, regardless of where they came from or how long they'd been among the stars. As the academy shrank into the distance, Jiho settled back in his seat. He had a new mission waiting, new challenges to face, new people to lead. But he carried with him the knowledge that somewhere behind him, the next generation of GDF officers was learning to think differently, to question assumptions, to embrace the diversity that made them stronger. And that, he thought, was worth every uncomfortable moment he'd endured. The transport broke through the atmosphere into the darkness of space, where countless stars beckoned with infinite possibilities. Somewhere out there, humanity's story in the galaxy was still being written, and if the Academy's transformation was any indication, it would be a story worth telling.